All right, so welcome everybody. My name's Josh Singer. I'm the DC Parks and Rec Community Garden Specialist. So thank you all for joining us. So this is something, we're all in the world of social distancing right now. We're trying to figure out how to put all of our classes online in webinar format. So we were right in the middle of our 101 course, which is our 16 class course. So just in the last couple of weeks, we've been moving them all to webinars. This is somewhat of a new thing for me, webinars. It's a little bit awkward. I don't know if anyone saw the John Oliver's latest show where he had no audience. I feel a little bit like that sometimes, especially my jokes are already awkward as it is. So so definitely bear with me, but also just help us kind of learn how to do this. So if you have any suggestions or any ways we could better do this, let us know. The ultimate goal of this is to, we had a huge, we wanted to, because we had such a huge demand right now from, this is kind of a perfect time right now to try to figure out how to garden. Not only to keep yourself sane while you're stuck in the house, but also to try to figure out how we can, we can start building our own local food systems, take the pressure off of our already very pressured food system that's happening right now. So really excited to just try to get as many people as possible to get this information. So so we released this second course. It's every Tuesday and Thursday from 11 to 1 p.m. Because I only have a Zoom Pro account, which allows me up to 100 people to participate. So we're gonna have somewhat of a small group. I know like something like 1,600 people were interested in at least getting the recording, but we're gonna have a nice small group that's gonna allow for us to kind of have some discussions and ask questions and things like that. DPR had, they signed up for a WebEx account that allowed up to 1,000 people, but I don't think we're ready do 1,000-person webinar. So we're going to start out small and maybe kind of work our way up. But at the same time, we're going to record all these episodes or all these webinars. I'm going to put them on line, probably stick them on YouTube's and embed the YouTube videos onto a page on the Doug Network, the DC Urban Garden Network, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And then we'll have a whole page for that. With all the courses. So even if you can't make any courses, they'll all be there, and definitely encourage people to share these courses as much as possible and to give us as much feedback. In addition to that, because there's so many people that aren't going to be able to actually participate and ask questions, on Wednesdays from noon to 1 at lunch hour, we're going to be we're going to be hosting weekly, just a weekly Q&A session. So if anyone has questions or want to follow up, or if they just saw the recording and they didn't have a chance to ask their questions, you can definitely log in. I know a lot of people are asking for evening classes. We already have one evening class going right now, and I have 2 little kids. I can't do any more evening stuff. So we're trying to just put everything during the day. And just a heads up, yeah, I have a 3-month-old and a 3-year-old, so you might hear some crying. The 3-month-old is just nonstop crying, and the 3-year-old might come down here. I told her not to come down in my basement right now, but if she does, that might be a good time to go use the bathroom or but I'll get her upstairs, and then so this is going to be a little interesting, but we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I'm really excited to start this. A couple of sessions when we do start this, I think we're good on bandwidth. I got like a landline Ethernet cord, so hopefully everything's gonna be good. But just some suggestions to keep your video off when we start the presentation. That will help with any kind of bandwidth problems. And basically, so how we've been doing it is if you have any questions, just kind of type them in the chat on the and then after each slide I'll answer any questions, and then if I'm on your question, if you want to add, you can unmute yourself and talk. Or if you have something like really important to say, feel free to unmute yourself. But for the most part, we want people to be muted. It's just so we don't have 20 people. I mean, if anyone's like experiencing some of these like crazy Zoom calls lately, it's good to have everyone muted and one at a time. But I know like last class that we had, I had the wrong picture for the wrong type. We were talking about bugs and insects and good and bad ones, and I had a bad picture. I was, well, we're talking about praying mantises, and there's some praying mantises that are more. I mean, they're all invasive, but there's some that's not so bad, and there's some that's really bad. And I had the wrong picture, so someone jumped in and unmuting themselves and corrected me. So feel free to do that kind of thing, but we just want to try to keep from a lot of people, so try to stay muted most of the time. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh yeah, so with presentations, I apologize. It took a while to actually, Google Drive is real slow today. So it took a while to upload it, but all the presentations will be in PDF forms on the Google folder, so you can download those if you like. Um, Trying to think, I'm going to do a Google group. A lot of people have been talking about trying to set up some kind of network that we can, talk and work on projects together. So I'm going to be creating a Google group later this week. I'm not going to direct add you. I'm just going to send out the invite. So keep an eye out for that if you want to join. Definitely with Google groups, if you have a lot of people talking every time, basically how Google groups work is there's a Google group email. Anytime you want to reach out to everyone, you email them like that Google group email, like a normal email, and that will go out to everybody. And then people can respond if you have questions, if you want to work on projects together, like do bulk purchasing, things like that. But I definitely recommend there's a section, if you don't want to be bombarded by emails, there's a section where you can click that has a digest, and you just get one email a day with everyone's emails. So I definitely recommend that. Trying to think, I think that's about it. Anyone have any questions before we kind of start the presentation? Cool. All right. So let's get started on this. Let's see. So everyone should see the PowerPoint right now. If not, let me know. All right, I'm gonna take my video off. Yeah, so if anyone has trouble seeing the PowerPoint, let me know. I think we're good to go. All right. So today's class is going to be about building the garden. So we're going to, I'll show you the schedule of the class. So each class we're going to talk about different steps, from like basic maintenance tips to, carpentry skills, to bugs, to all different kinds of things, to food justice issues. But today we're just going to talk about like how to actually build a garden and what we need to do to build a garden. And we're really going to have emphasis on home gardens, since it seems to be the thing right now. But really this could be, for anything. So we're going to talk about garden requirements. So all the things that will go into, what you need to actually have a garden. Sunlight, drainage, things like that. We're going to talk about preparing your soil. Most important part of your garden is your soil. We're going to talk about how to actually create garden beds with, raised beds or without raised beds. And we'll talk a little bit about design. And then like next class, we'll get into more of like planting techniques and maintenance and things like that. But this class is just about how we actually build the garden for now. Before we jump into this, just do some updates. So this is the schedule. I really, I love for everyone to attend every one of these classes, but I also know that, we got, this is a crazy time. So, all right, if you can't make the classes, we'll have recordings for you, but it's nice to have a little bit of audience, just so if I'm like not making sense at all, people can ask some questions and help me out and have some good discussions. But yeah, so today we'll talk about building garden, and next, Thursday, we'll talk about vegetables and maintenance issues, and we'll talk about garden calendars. So this is a big one. It's like, when do you do what when? Like, when do I start my seedlings? When do I need to start prepping my soil? And we'll just walk through the whole year and talk about what to do each month. So this is really important. So we're starting the seeds and propagating class. So this is if you want to grow seedlings and start seeds at home. So if you're interested in doing that, So this is going to be a little bit late. Normally this is something you want to start now. So what I'll probably do after this is I'm going to upload that presentation. So if people want to get started on, actually growing seeds for summer, it's kind of too late for spring right now. But if you want to start growing summer, which is like when you can start planting mid-May, tomatoes and peppers and things like that, you really want to get, start, seedling setups right now and get some grow lights and things and start growing. So I'll share that PowerPoint, but we're not going to get to that until beginning of April. So that'll be I'll give you enough time if you want to do a fall garden to start growing some fall seedlings. But it's just how it works. It's just not going to. Normally we try to talk, we start these classes in January, February, so people have a lot of time, but that's just how it works, and it's just not going to make sense if I start that right away. So just a heads up, and that could be something. If you have any questions on how to start growing seedlings this week, join the Q&A tomorrow. And then we'll talk about container gardens, pests and diseases, carpentry skills, composting fruit trees, talk about food justice issues. We broke the food justice class into 2 issues. We're going to talk about, national issues from like, seeds and GMOs and all the problems with our food systems. And then we're going to have a whole class on local issues where we're going to talk about, how getting away from, food deserts and start talking about food apartheids and understanding our communities and how the real issues that are causing lack of food security. And then our last class is going to be a harvesting and cooking and preserving. Normally it's a hands-on class, but this one we're going to do a lot of, we'll figure out some things to do for this one, but we'll talk about all the different ways to harvest and cook. So, and then, so I wanted to post this really quickly. If anyone's in need some issues, so a bunch of us, we do this a social justice page called the People School of DC. It's got a lot of different social justice issues if you want to get involved in, and different events and workshops and things around the city. But we made a page that's dedicated just to coronavirus resources. There's the table of contents. So if you're looking for anything from needs government assistance to workers' rights to where to food access, we actually worked with DC Food Project. That's got this amazing food access page too, and we worked with them to kind of start outlining, because there's so much information, it's just kind of overwhelming. So we're making maps and things. So this is where all the places. There's over 200 places right now, from schools to restaurants to Jose Andres, the community kitchens and stuff, that are serving free meals, particularly for youth, but also for adults and seniors and hospital workers. So if you want to kind of get some information, check that out. And if we're missing things or you have feedback on what we're posted, definitely let us know too. The last thing I want to kind of talk about is, so a couple years ago, DC has got this really amazing urban ag movement right now. It's really powerful. A couple years ago, we won Public Land Trust's the award, the most community gardens per capita. New York and Seattle have more community gardens than us, but when you do per capita, based on population, we really are leading the country in our urban ag movement. And we have amazing, food justice organizations, urban farms, school gardens and stuff. It's just a lot of people don't hear about it, and a lot of things are happening on the island. So we created this. There's a website called Doug Network, a DC Urban Garden Network, that just outlines, this was a couple years ago, and we actually we need to start updating more. We try to update it as much as possible, but we've, a couple years ago, we found over 500 different organizations that work in urban ag and food security, environmental areas. If you look down here, if you click on gardening, this is the home page. You'll see all these maps of gardens, educational resources, where to find composting, garden supplies. If you're looking for seedlings and where to volunteer, things like that. So it's just a huge resource for people. And if we're missing things, email them to us. On top of that, we also do a bi-monthly newsletter. This is the table of contents up here that there's just so many, every 2 weeks we send out newsletters, a really long, ugly newsletter, but it has tons of workshops and programs and jobs. At least 24 job openings in the urban ag area and food security every 2 weeks. grants and funding and things like that and garden tips. So definitely check that out. It's definitely, we're going to really try to start capturing more. We're noticing a lot more people are converting their workshops to webinars. So we're going to really try to capture all these webinars and send them out. So if you're interested in signing up for that, it's a free newsletter. We don't do anything with it. This is like a volunteer cooperative. No one gets paid. We don't share, your emails to anyone. It's very secure on MailChimp, and yeah, it's very easy to unsubscribe too. So if you don't like it, it's not that big of a deal to unsubscribe. But definitely check that out if you want to learn more about what's happening in the urban ag world. All right, so now we can kind of get more started. But we usually start this course with like why we do urban ag, and usually this is a discussion first. But a lot of reasons why. These are a lot of reasons that people talk about from why we grow our own food, and definitely right now. I mean, we talked a little bit already, just being in the corona, world of self-distancing. I mean, gardening is very therapeutic, especially if you're trapped in a house, especially with some little kids and need a break, or gardening is. I mean, this is definitely a great way to kind of just kind of it's very therapeutic. Something that you can do every day, going out there and watering and taking care of your plants and things. I think is really important. At the same time, also just like if anyone's been to the grocery store, we're such a huge burden right now in our grocery stores, and if you've been in especially in some of these in the produce aisles, they're struggling. So just being able to grow our own food right now is very, very important. So we want as many people as possible to start growing their own food. On top of that, taste. I thought all tomatoes tasted like plastic until I grew my own first tomato. It's amazing. I mean, growing, taste how wonderful these things taste when we grow them on ourselves and have them fresh, straight from the garden. If you ever want to get like little kids, my favorite tomato is Sun Gold. So they're small cherry tomatoes. It's a hybrid that's been bred. They're very prolific. If you want to grow a lot of cherry tomatoes very quickly, very easily, Sun Golds are fantastic. And they got like the highest sugar content. It's still not a lot of sugar, but it's got the highest sugar content of tomatoes. So it's very sweet. It's a sweet tomato. So if you ever want to get someone on board with tomatoes, like let them, give them a Sun Gold. Health-wise, just improve, increasing our access to healthy foods and affordable foods too. I mean, if you go to Whole Foods right now, you could drop an insane amount of money buying food that was grown, on the other side of the country. So really, it's important to kind of, growing our own food. Save a lot of money. We're saving the planet. It's great to try to find local sources, farmers markets, local CSAs. Right now there's a lot of options for local food, but at the same time, most people go to the grocery store and most of that food is grown on other side of the country, if not other side of the world. So it comes with a huge carbon footprint. It comes with a huge footprint on labor rights and animal rights and environment. So just creating a better system by growing our own food. And then being part of like community gardens and building community. I really like. I mean, you have to be intentional. And we're going to talk about this during our local food justice class, because a lot of community gardens, if you're not intentional, you can create these like very exclusive systems that actually end up dividing the communities. And we've seen that, we see that a lot in DC. So we're going to talk about ways to not do that and how to actually include the community in every part of the design and implementation and the benefit of these projects. And when you do that, it's a really great way to just meet your community, meet your neighbors, and build, cooperative structures around, shared resources. It's a really great idea. And then just empowering is such an amazing thing, just to grow your own food. It just feels so good to grow your own food and go out and to harvest it. Yeah. So moving on to that, let's actually get into some of the nuts and bolts. So now we're going to start talking about, okay, we're everyone's sold, they want to build gardens. Now we're going to talk about how do we actually build a garden. So the first thing we're going to talk about is requirements. There's certain things you need to actually have, before in your area that you want a garden, like your backyard. There's certain things that you need. And if you don't have those things, you need to find in their spot. And the three main things is sunlight, drainage, and water. These are the things that you definitely need. unless you're like growing like mushrooms, then you don't need all this stuff. But for the most part, you need these three things. So sunlight's the first one. So sunlight. So we get a lot of sunlight throughout the day. So there's two categories. There's full sun plants and partial shade plants. And a lot of people think full sun, that means we need an entire, day of sunlight. And it's true that if you do get, an entire day of sunlight, that your plant's going to be happy. But really, you don't need the entire day to do full sun plants. Because in the summer, I mean, you can get up to like 14, 15, 16 hours of sunlight, and that's great for your plants, but most plants don't need that much sunlight. So full sun, most of your plants you're going to want to be growing are full sun, especially like the summer plants, the warm weather plants, which we'll talk about. There's warm weather plants, and then there's cool weather plants. Cool weather you can plant in spring and fall. Warm weather you plant in the summer, and we'll talk a lot more about that in the next class. But most of your warm weather plants need full sun. These are your tomatoes, your peppers, your sweet potatoes, eggplants, things like that. They want full sun, but full sun really is like about 6 to 8 hours. So I mean, if you in the middle of the summer, you may get up to like 14 or hours. So really, what you need for full sun is you need two cardinal directions. So cardinal directions, north, south, east, west. So let's say, the sun rises in the east, it travels, through the sky in the south, and then sets in the west. It's low in the sky and over the winter, spring, and fall, but in the summer, it's pretty, it's pretty high up in the air. So if you get at least two of those three directions, that's enough to get full sunlight. So let's say you get the sun in the east, and then you get the sun in the south, but then you have a giant tree in the west that blocks the last parts of the day. That's still enough full sun. Or if you maybe you have a building right in front of you, but you get a couple hours of sunlight in the morning, a couple hours sunlight in the evening, for east and west. That's enough for full sun. So really, like, you want to get like 2 out of the 3 directions of the sunlight, and that should give you enough sun to do most plants. You definitely want, so you want to plant, so you have a backyard, you want to see, like, am I getting, at least, 2 out of the 3 of the east, south, and west directions. And if you're only getting one of those, let's say, you have a big tree on your east side, you have a big building on your south side, but then you get a couple hours of sunlight at the end of the day. So as long as you're getting at least 3 hours, and then you can start doing partial shade plants. So partial shade plants, you need about 3 to 6 hours. They'll be happier in full sun. Everything's a little bit more happier in full sun for the most part, but partial shade plants can survive and thrive in partial shade. So they'll need about 3 to 6 hours. So let's say, again, like you got, you get a bunch of morning sun hours, but then you got a building on your south side and a tree on your west side, and then you can think about partial shade. So I wrote a big list of partial shade plants that do really well, like greens do great in partial shade. Herbs, we're gonna talk a lot more about herbs, but herbs are like, if you're looking for easy things to start off, herbs are great, especially perennial herbs that come back every year. But like herbs like chives and cilantro and parsley do pretty well in partial shade. Root vegetables like beets and carrots, radishes are great. And then legumes. So legumes, what's great about legumes, you definitely want to figure out a small section of your garden to have just legumes, and then you want to move that section around every year, because legumes are nitrogen fixers. That means they suck nitrogen out of the air, and they actually deposit it in these little nodules in their roots in the soil, and then they slowly seep out. And then when you till them in too, the nitrogen slowly seeps out, so it actually adds nitrogen to your soil. So everything else, like your greens and your herbs and root vegetables, are sucking up nitrogen. Legumes actually add nitrogen. So you really, we'll talk more about crop rotation in a second. I think that's next class, but it's really great just to designate a little section in your garden to have peas in the spring, and then beans in the summer. And then some people are able to get peas, another peas in the fall, and then other people just grow their beans, for the rest of the year. And then and just and get as much as from there. But they have a little section in their garden where peas and beans, and then they move that section around every year to a different part of your garden. That way, in that section you're adding nitrogen to that section, so you're kind of moving it around your garden and adding nitrogen every year to a different part of your garden. But legumes are really great. Definitely try to figure out how to incorporate legumes. And then fruits like currants and gooseberries and strawberries. Strawberries are fantastic for your gardens, especially if you're into more of a permaculture, non-till. My garden right now, basically I have like a living mulch where I just have strawberries everywhere growing in between, underneath my tomatoes, all over the place. And it's fantastic. There's a really great place called Stark Brothers that has this awesome deal on strawberries where you can, it's a package deal where they'll send you like 75 strawberries, and they're like different varieties, so they bloom at, they fruit at different times throughout the year. And it's like $10 for like 75 strawberries, and it's like the coolest. My little, my 3-year-old loves just to go out every day in the summer. She picks strawberries, and that was from planting them in the spring. And gooseberries are fantastic too. If anyone's grown blueberries, I used to grow all kinds of blueberries at different gardens, and blueberries are tough because they like to have really acidic soil. So you have to, mix more peat or compost or things, every year to kind of, increase the acidity. But I don't know, a lot of my blueberries don't make it. So I discovered gooseberries, looking for a good blueberry alternative. And gooseberries, they're not quite like blueberries, but they're super hardy. They're super hard to kill, and like they can work in any kind of environment. And then so there's also things like, if you, let's say you get like 4 or 5 hours of sunlight and you really want to do a tomato, there are things that you can actually do to increase your sunlight. And that has a lot to do with kind of finding ways to reflect the sunlight, because so your leaf, the leaves on your plants can absorb sunlight on the bottom and top. So if you find ways to kind of like just bounce that sunlight back and forth and hit that plants in multiple different ways, that's going to increase the amount of chlorophyll it can absorb from the sunlight, and you're going to be able to actually grow more plants. And like, there's a couple different ways you could do that. One is like if you have a if you plant your garden on the south side of the wall, so let's say the wall is on the north side and the sun's going around in a circle, paint that wall or white. White reflects sunlight a lot more than any other color, and so that way not only is your the sunlight hitting the front of the plants, but it's also hitting the wall, bouncing off and hitting the back of the plants. So that's going to double a lot of the sunlight you're getting. So if you're like, you have somewhat of a shady spot, but you just really want to have tomatoes, you can try that. Another thing you could try is putting down reflecting the light from the bottom of your garden. So putting down, what's called reflective mulching. You can do aluminum foil, things like that. They have a really expensive, reflective mulch you can buy. I find the best thing to do is Mylar. Mylar has there's some kind of rating system, but Mylar has the best rating for reflecting sunlight. So a lot of people use Mylar from, like, if they're growing seedlings and things indoors and they want to reflect the sunlight, or if you have plants on windowsills and not getting enough sunlight, you can put some Mylar behind it and reflect it. And the best place to get Mylar, which is kind of hard right now, but just like keep a tab on this, is if you go to any kind of race, a marathon. At the end of the marathon, you'll just see piles of Mylar blankets. Mylar is that special kind of like aluminum foil blanket that people get just a second, I just spilled a little water on the, okay. So Mylar's, it's like those like fire blankets that they have in like emergency kits and stuff, but they use it for, in the runners, they give it one to every person running a marathon, and then they just have giant piles of it. So don't ever buy Mylar, go out to a marathon, find the end point and just pick up as much as you can, because I don't think, they don't reuse that stuff. But yeah, if you lay that stuff down on the bottom of your plants, so that sunlight is going to bounce off and hit the bottom of the leaves. And the bottom leaves are not as efficient for absorbing chlorophyll, but they are, they can still absorb chlorophyll. So that's going to increase the amount of sunlight. So there is some kind of tips. If you want to kind of push it, you can find ways to reflect that sunlight to increase that. And then drainage. So drainage is a big, big problem, especially in DC, or especially just in any urban environments, especially at your homes, because a lot of times when they built your house, they really compacted the soil outside. And, so drainage, you need good drainage. This is another one reason why a lot of people do raised beds, because they just don't want to deal with bad drainage. So we'll talk about this more later, but one of the reasons why people, raised beds are great. They're really easy, but they have an upfront cost. It could be a couple $100s for materials and soil, and also, and they're great for beginners. But if you really want to grow a lot of food, it's good to learn how to grow in the ground, because that's really where you're going to grow a whole lot of food. But I definitely recommend raised beds when you're starting off, if you're a new garden. But if you're going to grow in the ground, you want to check for drainage. So there's a drainage test you could do, where you actually dig a hole with a shovel. A shovel is almost a foot tall and almost a foot wide. It's a good measurement tool. It's not exactly, but the idea is you want to dig the hole, a foot deep or the size of the shovel. You want to fill that up once with water, and let it drain, come back the next day, kind of primes it, and then you want to fill it up again. And the idea is, you can get measuring tape, and you can, actually time this to see, and the idea is you want to have, 1 to 3 inches per hour. That's if you have a free day. A lot of times I'll fill it up and I'll come back in a couple hours. And if it's not, it's significantly going down, especially if it hasn't moved at all, or if it's barely moved after a couple hours, you definitely want to think about other options. And we'll talk more in a second about other options. So I just did, okay. So there's a question. I will be growing my plants indoors. How do I know how many hours of sunlight comes through my window? Should I start a timer when I see the first rays of sunlight coming through? For reference, my window faces southeast. Yeah, the timer is great. If you got, especially right now, when we're all stuck in our homes, that's the best way. Yeah, I time it, when the sun comes in, and then, stop it, check it every hour, and then stop it when it's, that's the best thing. Normally people can't really do that because they don't, they're not in their homes, or they're doing things. But now is a great time to do that. And you can do that outside too, if you want to just time to see how many hours you have. Normally, if you have a south facing window, you can grow a lot of things in your window. Like I said, we have we're gonna have a whole class on growing indoors. And we'll talk about things like, the best thing you could do if you're worried about sunlight is get that mylar. Get some mylar or something, aluminum foil if you don't have mylar right now. Tape it to, some cardboard, and put it behind your plant. So that way, when the sun comes in, it's getting it from the front, and then it goes, and it's reflected and going back. But you want your windows to be south facing. If you have a north facing window, it's not going to work. If you had east or west, you might be able to do some herbs, some partial shade herbs. But indoors, if you're going to grow, most things are going to need a south facing window. All right, so someone's hand goes up. I don't really know what that means, but if you want to, maybe whoever that was, if you want to type your question in, or take yourself off mute, and you can ask. All right, so just let me know. We're gonna move on. Okay, so one more question. Can you replace a section of dirt in your yard with clay soil, with garden soil, and plant in there, or does it develop a pool? Yeah, you're exactly right. Sometimes you can. We'll talk about here, next slide. Some of your options. So one of your options is let's double dig. We'll talk about that in a second, but let's till the area, add a bunch of compost. If you have some coarse sand or perlite, add that into that. And if you do it in a large area, it will help your garden. But sometimes, if it's the drainage is really bad around you, and then you just dig this little hole and make it really nice, a lot of the water sometimes will wash into, and you'll create like a pool effect. We did that with one of our farms that we built in Fort Stanton area. We built this farm that DC Urban Greens was operating, and we did that. We removed all the dirt soil and put this really nice fluffy soil in, and it just kind of pooled into there. Now we're figuring out, we're actually doing a bunch of different things to kind of help with drainage now, but that wasn't the issue. So I mean, you still want to, you still want to dig your area out, add some compost, fluff it up. That's going to help. But if your drainage is really bad around it, there's a chance you could just be you could be digging a pool. So it's something to think about. So if you do have bad drainage, so here's some of the things that you can do. One, like we said, we could double dig. We're going to have a slide on double digging, but basically double digging is tilling an area 2 feet deep. It's a lot of work, and we only do it once when you're doing a new garden. It's not something you do every year, but the idea is you till it to the point where you got 2 feet of nice soil. Most plants really they only really need like a foot of soil, especially if you're doing container gardens. But if you give them 2 feet of nice, they're going to be really happy. So again, it's not something you want to do every year because it could be, it's a lot of work. And then like the easiest one is like you got bad drainage, let's do some raised beds. And we'll talk all about how to build raised beds and things that, and all that stuff. And then you don't necessarily have to do raised beds. Let's say you don't want to like, drop the money on, I mean, it could be, anywhere from, $150 to $1,000, depending on what kind of materials and you're doing. So let's say you don't want to do that. You can actually just mound your soil up on this bottom right. So you don't, so these are also raised beds. They don't have the wood behind them. But the idea is you want to have that, at least a foot of soil on top. That's the goal. I mean, over the season, it's going to, it's going to decrease, but you want to start the season off with soil. The mound needs to be at least a foot taller than your walkway. So that's, and you want to think about if you're doing that, you want to get like a hard rake, not like a leaf rake, but like it's called a hard rake. It's got a metal tines, and that's going to help you kind of like, create that mound and rake that mound, the area up. So then like another thing too is if you have, maybe it's just like a bad point where water's, filling up. So you could think about doing trenchings and French drains. French drains is like basically, you can actually buy a whole kit now that comes with a sock around it full of like, all you have to do is dig a trench and then just lay it. It's really easy. Home Depot has that stuff. Before you had to get this perforated pipe. Perforated means that they have holes in them, and then you line that with landscape fabric, and then you fill the hole up with some kind of gravel. That's why when water comes in, it will all get caught in this trench, and then will rush out. And you could direct that out to a rain garden or someplace that can handle the water or something. And then that will help you kind of move that water away from your garden. So that takes a little bit of work. There's a lot of YouTube videos on how to do that. Like I said, it's really easy now. Like you could just buy the drain with its own socks and pebbles and stuff. You don't need to get gravel anymore. You just dig a trench, throw this like this pre-wrapped perforated pipe, and then just fill it back up. You just don't want to like compact the top too much. You want to leave it kind of pervious. And then the biggest one is like, or we can capture excess water. So that's on our farm in Fort Stanton. We had all that drainage issues. So there's a bunch of hoop houses out in this farm. So we actually installed, gutters on the hoop houses and then directed them all to rain barrels, and that, decreased the excess water a lot. So there's a lot of issues you can do. But the easiest one, if you have really bad drainage, is just trying to find another place, that has better drainage. So that's another thought. And then water access. So let's say we have a good spot, it has good sunlight, and we have a good, it has, decent drainage. I'm going to do raised beds. So the last thing you really need to know, figure out is water access. And that can, make or break. I mean, there's a lot of creative ways to do water access. I started this garden, Wangari Gardens, by the Washington Hospital Center, and we did not have any water access. There was no water pipes to drill into and tap into. There was no other option. So what we did was we built. We contacted DC Water. DC Water has these hydrant meters that mainly for developers and construction workers who want to tap into the water. It keeps track of how much water you use, and you don't have to. It's really cheap. It's a lot more cheaper because you don't have to pay. Was that sewage? Most places that you're paying, water and sewage for your water bill. You take that in once a month to DC Water. They read it, and then every 3 months they send you a bill. It's like a $700 deposit, and it could be a lot of work. But we tapped into that. We made these special hoses that could go ran across the street, and then we filled up the cistern once a week, and it takes like 4 or 5 hours to fill up that cistern, and then people just use gravity from that cistern and watering can. I mean, it's a lot of work, so it's possible, but you really want to try to find some access issue, water. The biggest ones, if you have a water spigot, great. Some of your buildings may have these like weird looking things that you just need a water key. It's like an X. And they're like the different kinds of ratchets, and you can turn them on. So a lot of our rec centers and public buildings would have that. So if you have a community garden or garden project next to that, you can go to Home Depot and just for a couple bucks get a water key. You could tap into water lines. So before you actually dig anything, if you're digging more than a foot, deep, you're supposed to call Miss Utility. It's a free service, Miss Utility, and they come out, within a couple of days. You just tell them where you're digging, and they come out, and they'll look for all the lines, the utility lines in your area, like water, sewer, gas, electric. I mean, that's good to know. You don't want to tap into like a sewer line or gas line, even though most of those lines are below the frost line. They're like 3 feet deep, but some of the lines like internet and cable, that's usually a foot deep. I used to work for Casey Trees, and we'd do these massive tree plantings, and someone would forget to call Miss Utility. We would often cut somebody's shovel would break an internet line or a cable line. So you definitely want to do that just to make sure you're not cut anything. But really what you're looking for is they come out and they spray paint the areas and put flags and stuff. And what you're looking for is a blue line, a blue flag or a blue spray paint. And that means there's a water line. And so if there's a water line, that means you can tap into it. It's a bit of a process. You got to work with DC Water. It could be about $1,000 installation and maybe another $1,000 because you got to get a backflow preventer and a meter. You're essentially setting up a service there. Where DC Water is going to send you a bill, but that is possible for a couple $1,000. Which if you're doing like a community garden, that's not too bad to have everyone throw in like $10, $20. But that's one option. But you need to have a water line. If your nearest water line is across the street, I mean, it could be like 50 grand to break up a section of the street and run a water line. So that's not too feasible. And then collecting water. That's another option. It's a great option. I recommend everyone should have, especially since we had this great program called River Smart Homes, where Department of Energy and Environment will actually heavily subsidize rain barrels and rain gardens and planting trees. They're super cheap, and they'll come and install everything for you. It's a bit of a waiting list. I mean, it could take like a year to get a rain barrel, but once you do, they'll install everything. It's fantastic. But you want to know when you're collecting water, you want to look for if you have these asphalt shingles, because there's some heavy metals in this, which isn't bad. It's mainly because when it's like when water first comes, the first flush of water within the first 5-10 minutes, they'll wash away any crumbles. Other than that, it's pretty stable. So if you do have that, you want to get what's called a first flush system, where it's basically the water runs down, and then and there's another pipe, and the water goes down here. It will deposit any heavy metals, and then clean water will float back up, and then will go into your rain barrel. So if you do have asphalt shingles, it's not the worst thing in the world, but these things accumulate over time. So I would just recommend getting the first flush system. And then, like we talked about, renting a hydrant meter, and then just carrying water on site is another option. It's a pain in the butt, but it's an option. And there's a lot of other creative options too. I know there's a lot of these awesome Capitol Hill gardens that are in the middle of these square blocks of houses, and in the middle they have a big open area. And there's like 7 or 8 of them, and they've been around for a while, for decades. But most of them don't have water. So what they usually do is they'll get one homeowner to run a hose from his house, and then they'll pay that homeowner every month, from garden plot dues to reimburse them for the water. So that's another option. And then we're experimenting. We're about to drill, or at least we were. We'll see how. Hopefully it's still going. But this summer we're going to drill. I believe the first urban farm solar well at the Fort Stanton project. So that's another option. I mean, that could still be like 5, 10, 20 grand, depending on what you're going to, do. But that is an option. It's a heavy permit option with DOEE, but it's definitely. I have a contractor that has done wells in DC. So if you're interested in that option, definitely reach out. So question. So there was a couple. I purchased a rain barrel and plan to harvest off of my roof. I found a list of approved coatings, but I'm curious if you have any recommendations for a coating for best water quality. I'm not sure what coating is. If you want to maybe unmute yourself, could you add to that? Is it Salah?
Hi, this is Evan Constantine and Salha.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for this. I have a rolled roof, so it's like a rubberized flat roof. And I did find a list, and I don't have it handy, but it was like approved. Every few years you're supposed to recoat your roof just to seal everything. And I found a list of approved ones specifically for rainwater harvesting, but I just wanted to ask you to see if you had any firsthand experience with it essentially goes on like a paint.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just I guess there's some that are better than others for rainwater harvesting specifically. It's definitely for a vegetable garden, so I wanted to make sure I invested into the right product.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I don't know much about it, but if you want to maybe send me an email, I have some friends at DOEE that can probably verify if there's things that, there's certain coatings maybe that leach things and certain ones that don't.
Okay, sure.
I could definitely try to verify it with you, and then maybe send that out to everybody.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Cool, thank you. Next question, water access as in watering the plants? Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Yeah, water access, watering the plants. Thank you. All right, so those were the three things that you really need. Sunlight, drainage, and then water access. And with those three things, we can work with, as long as you have these three things, we could definitely work with whatever situation you have. All right, soil prep. So now let's say, so we have a spot that does really well. It's got, decent sunlight. It's got drainage, or we're just going to build some raised beds. It's got water access. So now we want to talk about, let's get the soil ready. And we're going to talk about a lot of things. We try to do different levels of garden classes, like beginners and experts, and it just didn't work out very well. So I'll just give you a heads up. A lot of these courses are, it's like a hodgepodge of beginner stuff and and expert stuff. So don't feel overwhelmed that you have to do everything that we talk about. A lot of this stuff, like I tell people, usually the basic, like if you just want to have an easy garden, first year, just wait till about mid-May, buy, your favorite seedlings at the store, buy a couple bags of compost, just till up everything or build a raised bed, plant that stuff and just water it until every day or every other day till it dies in the fall. And then buy a bag of mulch and throw it on top, just to protect it over the winter. Like that's kind of like the basic gardening that that you could do, but then the idea is, as you start picking up this gardening and figuring it out, we're going to talk about a lot of other things that you could do, adding different seasons, like growing spring and fall, growing over the winter, different techniques to prepare your soils and cover crops and things so don't feel overwhelmed, but it's more just like, just do what, like I said, there's a basic level that you can do and then kind of add from there, each year. But for soil prep, so one thing that is a good idea, if you're actually growing in the ground, you want to do a soil test. So soil test, we'll talk about how to actually do a soil test. It's actually pretty easy. Everyone could do it at their home, and you mail it away to the nearest lab. So what you're looking for with soil tests, the biggest thing is you're looking for a pH. pH is like the level of acidity versus alkaline in your soil, and that's really important. I know this chart looks kind of confusing, but the idea, if you look at, so pH, it starts from 0, it's like the most acidic, like pure acid, and then it goes up to like 12 or 14, and that's like pure alkaline. But then in the middle you have idea is like plants, like they need the right environment to actually suck up the nutrients. A lot of times your soil has all the nutrients that you can want in your soil, but it's like too acidic, or there's or it's like, you know, gets too wet or something, and the plants just can't, you know, pull up the nutrients. Because ideally, like the perfect eye area of pH is you're looking for like 5.5 to around 7. And if you look at that, like I know it's confusing chart, but if you look at like when it starts narrowing down, that means it's harder for plants to pick up, you know, nutrients when it's like super acidic, except for maybe iron. And then like same with alkaline, you know, if it's super alkaline, then it's hard for nitrogen to be absorbed. It's hard for magnesium. So that's the idea, is you want to go really about between 5 to 7.5 is like the general, but I mean your ideal is 5.5 to 7 is what you're looking for acidity wise. And that's really good. I mean, you can actually at Home Depot, you can pick up a little pH test and try that out if you just want to do a pH. But I would really recommend doing a full scale soil test, and they'll give you a more accurate reading on pHs. Oh, and it ranges 14 is that the alkaline. So what you're looking for, you're looking for like macronutrients and micronutrients. So macro is like the your NPK, your nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. So that's like what, you know, the 3 things that your plants need the most of. And then there's micro, there's all different kinds of like, you know, sulfur and calcium and magnesium and stuff. And it can get a little overwhelming. I'll talk about some general awesome organic fertilizers where you don't really have to think about all this stuff. You can just apply one thing and feel good. And compost, generally compost has all this stuff too, if you have good compost. So adding, you know, making sure to add compost every year helps too. But you're looking for that. You're looking for organic matter. You know, 3 to 6%. That's something though you can easily fix. You can add compost to increase your organic matter every year. And then you're looking for contaminants. So a lot of soils have these natural things like lead and arsenic. It occurs naturally in soils. It's just when there's high levels, that usually means there was some kind of like runoff somewhere. You know, like lead. We used to put lead in gasoline and paint and all different kinds of things. And then like arsenic and stuff, like we used to have like giant piles of coal outside people's houses about a century ago, and like there's a lot of contaminants and leaks off of that. So it's good to kind of understand about these chemicals. And a lot of times it's not because your plant is going to absorb. There's a lot of studies that talk about like if you do have toxic soil, you may not want to grow lettuces, but if you're growing tomatoes, there's a lot of studies that talk about how like a lot of the contaminants are stored in the stalks in the woody areas and doesn't actually make it to the fruit. The real concern is when that you inhale this stuff. Like if you're working in soil and it's dry and you kick some soil up and you inhale it, that's like the real concern with lead and arsenic. So that's why you really want to know what's in your soil. Let's see. So a couple questions. Can you grow solely in leaf grow? Not really. I mean, you probably could. A lot of people do grow just in compost, but leaf grow is a soil amendment. What you really want is like a soil structure. You want to have actual topsoil, and then you add compost to that stuff. I know some people do grow in all compost. It's really hard. You want to, we'll talk more about ratios, but you want to have mainly topsoil, and then you add some compost every year to mix it up. Macronutrients, they are what, you know, the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus are the 3 things that soil need, you know, plants need the most of. So that's why when you generally buy fertilizers, I'll show you on a different side, it's mainly focused on those 3 things unless it says micro. Let's see, Josh, in my community garden, we use leaf mulch from a city a lot. Is this got contaminants? How about fertility, about using leaf mulch? Yeah, so leaf mulch, I think you're probably talking about picking that up from the transfer station. The Fort Totten transfer station. So what we do when we suck up all our leaves, our street tree leaves, DPW sucks them up, and then we send them out to what's Pogo's Organics. It's a tree planting nursery place that does a lot of composting, and they compost it as leaf mulch. They'll turn it, and then they make essentially, you know, leaf grow. Leaf grow is basically just compost from streets from leaves. It's not the, you know, it's good organic matter. It's not the best compost, but it's good. Like if that's all you got, that works really well. A lot of times though, with Fort Totten, they'll send it back and it's not completely finished. So it'll be chunky or maybe steaming a little bit. So that is more of a mulch. So that stuff I would let it like maybe sit in a pile for a while, let it finish. or add it early before you plant plants. So it's not the worst thing in the world to add, some half finished stuff, or you can use it as mulch. Just know that a lot of that stuff is taken from the street. So there may be some runoff, there may be some trash. They don't filter it, so there may be a little bit of trash in there. So generally, it really comes down to your own, personal preference. If you want to be completely clean, don't use that stuff. Buy your leaf grow from like the Maryland Environmental Center, in different places, or nurseries. You can buy a leaf grow, but a lot of people, like, they don't mind a little bit. Sometimes it's just like some shredded up, bags or stuff. It's not like, it's not terrible, but it's really your preference. But there is, some things in there. And the fertility, yeah, it's all right. It's not the best stuff, but yeah, it's good. It's better than nothing for sure. Does UDC have a land grant university still conduct soil tests? Yeah, so UDC, they're hit or miss because their funding is kind of all over the place for their lab. They'll have parts where they'll, like when they first started, they got some funding and all the tests were free, and they're like sending people out to your houses. It was amazing. I think they lost that funding. And now I think it's, you have to pay for the test, but it's kind of hit or miss. I mean, it's something you can look up on UDC Lab. I'll show you some links to check out. Is DC still giving free compost away? Are they closed due to COVID? Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're probably closed that resource. So that's something to think about. I'm pretty sure, yeah, you can't pick up Fort Totten compost. I'm not 100% sure, but I would guess that they closed that option. But when this is all over, that's a resource. You can go to Fort Totten and pick up free compost there. Yeah, it is free service with sulfur through, let's see, what's the ratio of compost, soil, other amendments I should have. We'll talk about ratios in a second, but like I said, it's really like 90 to 5% topsoil, and then you add some amendments. I used to do 50-50. I would add, 50% topsoil, 50% compost, and your plants love that. They love 50-50. But then at the end of the year, your raised bed is half filled, because all that compost, breaks down completely within a year, and then it's a big hassle trying to refill that. So now I just fill my beds up completely with topsoil, and then I buy a couple bags of compost and mix it up in there, and I think that works a lot better. A friend picked up some compost from Fort Totten a couple days ago. They were still open. Okay, so Fort Totten still is open. So it looks like you can get some compost there. Just, social distance on that stuff. But yeah, thanks. It's good to know. All right, so moving forward, so actually doing the soil test. So there's a couple things you need for the soil test. We do have a tool share that's closed right now, but when it opens again, we have these nice fancy augers where you can just like shove it into the ground and you get this nice cross section of soil. But if you don't have that, you can use a shovel. You need a bucket, a tarp, a plastic bag, and a Sharpie. So how it actually works is you want to designate each area in your garden its specific unique area. So if you have one part of your garden, your yard that maybe has some runoff, maybe like your roof, your asphalt shingles are running into it. Maybe it was like it had some construction there, and then you have this other part of your yard that doesn't have that stuff. Those are two different unique areas, and they require two different soil tests. So you want to kind of figure out, you want to do a different soil test for each area that has different factors. So if you have a nice little wooded area, that's one soil test. If you have an area next to the road that maybe gets runoff, that's another soil test. So you want to keep them separate so you get more accurate readings. So how you do that is ideally you want to dig, anywhere between 5 to 15 holes in your unique area. You want to dig the hole 1 foot deep, 1 foot wide, again about the size of your shovel. And then what you was, like I said, you can either auger, the section, the soil sample, or you can take a shovel and just slice a little 1 inch thick edge on the hole. But the idea is you want to get that slice, about at least 8 inches to a foot down there, and about 1 inch thick. The idea is there's different soil levels. You want to get a little bit of each soil level. So then you take that out, you pull, remove the sod, remove any rocks, any trash, and then just throw that, just the soil into a bucket. And you want to do that, at least 5 times in your area, more, because you want to do each hole like, 10, 15 feet apart. Just use your judgment, but get enough samples that you feel confident that you're in that area. And then from there, you want to you get 5, 10, 15 samples, throw it on the bucket, and then you mix that bucket up really well. And then dump. You don't have to, but I usually dump the bucket onto a tarp and in the sunlight, let it dry out a little bit because you don't need that moisture. It's just going to be extra weight you got to ship. And then maybe mix it up one more time after it dries out. And then really, like, all you really need is like a cup worth of soil. You don't need a lot. So you can so you just get a 1 cup of soil, put it into a plastic bag, label that with a Sharpie. Especially if you're doing multiple tests, make sure to label each one. And then you can throw the rest of the soil back into the holes. And then you can. There's 3 good areas to soil test in the area. There's probably more, but these are like the 3 main ones that a lot of people use. So A&L Eastern Labs in Virginia, University of Massachusetts Amherst, and then UDC, depending on their open status. So basically, you could go on their website. They'll have information. You usually have to print off an application. You send them maybe a check for. There's different pricing, but I think it's like anywhere from like maybe like 10 or 20. All right, hold on for a second. My 3-year-old's coming down. This might be a good chance to get, if you need a water break or a bathroom. I'll be back in 1 minute. Hey, Randy, what you need? Okay, sorry about that. I'm back. So my wife is putting down our 3-month-old, and she'll be down in a second. But my 3-year-old is hanging around, so you might hear a little bit. But like I said, everyone's kind of doing their best right now. So yeah, there's 3 different spots to sell or to actually send out for soil tests. UMass, A&L. They can range. The soil tests can range anywhere from like I think from like like $10, $20 to like $40 or $50, depending on all the things that you want to test for. Certain ones can test for arsenic and lead and different things like that. And then if you want to get really into, we're going to talk more about soil biology during the compost class. But if you want to get really into like biology testing, there is there are some really great soil biology labs called Earth Fort and Soil Food Lab Web. You can send that out there, and they'll let you know what kind of microbiology, the beneficial biology that you have, which is really fantastic when you have good. That's the main thing you really want in your soil is like some really healthy biology. Let's see. So another question, Josh. Questions about bad soil prep. If you're digging up sod, how do you deal with plants already growing on the sod? Not sure. I mean, like, can you just, or are you talking about plants that you want to keep? Okay, well, let me know more about that question. We're going to move on. Weeds and things like that. Yeah, you definitely don't want to add the weeds. You want to remove those things. Don't add them to the soil test. Just kind of remove them. Okay, so moving on. Let me know if I didn't answer the question. So test results. So you send that stuff in. You can mail it. Actually, within a couple of days, they'll actually email you the test results. And it looks crazy. It could be a little overwhelming, but there's really only a couple of things you need to look for. You're looking for the soil pH. So 5.6, so that's definitely in the 5.5 to the 7, so this is good soil. You can see organic matter. I think this is like a hoop house, so it's really high, but it'll tell you. But again, like it's not, if you have low organic matter, you can just add some compost. It'll tell you some, the nutrient levels. The NPK is always first. But again, that's not, a lot of times they don't tell you nitrogen because it's so fluctuating. But again, those things you can fix by adding compost and some organic fertilizers and stuff. So that's not a big deal. Really, what you're looking for is the pH. You want to make sure the pH is in 5.5, and you want to look at any contaminants. So the contaminants, so they'll either say parts per million ppm or milligram versus over kilogram. They're basically the same thing. Like I said, there's natural occurring levels in lead and arsenic. So lead, you want to be below 300. That's 300 is like the natural level. So if you're above 300, there's like different categories. If you're just barely above 300, you want to use some precautions. If you're way above 300, you want to like find another place to garden, or do some raised beds and put some landscape fabric underneath, so you don't kick that stuff up. And the arsenic, you want to be below 20 parts per million too. So definitely, yeah, these are the main things. You want to find the pH, and then you want to see how your contaminant levels are, and make sure they're in below these levels. And then there's another option. You don't have to do these things, but if you have some time, especially if you're like wanting to start a garden in fall, or you want to if this fall you want to prep for next spring, there's a couple things you could do to kind of just prepare your soil. It's sheet mulching and lasagna gardening. They're basically the same thing. It's just lasagna gardening is a lot taller. But the idea is, let's say you have a bunch of sod. You don't want to kill your bag breaking up the sod. So a really easy way to do is you lay a bunch of cardboard over the sod, and then you throw a bunch of like compost on top of that, and then if possible some mulch and things like that. And what that's going to do is, one, it's going to kill your sod, so that's going to make it easier to dig from that, and then it's going to start decomposing things. Once that organic matter starts rotting, you're going to attract beneficial insects like worms and things in there. They're going to start doing a little tilling. And then from there, and the idea is you can do that like a month before you plant, but ideally you want to do that like a season before. Like if you do this in the fall, and then and you plant in the spring, it's really going to really self-till the area. I mean, it's going to be really easy for you. And you want to water it too. You want to water it to kind of help it kind of break down. But that's really going to help prepare your soil, make it easier to till, and also attract some beneficial organisms. And then lasagna gardening is like the same concept, but you just, let's say you got access to a lot of like, plant, organic matter, like you're next to a forest or something. You just want to, or you bag your grass or leaves. You want to build like a giant pile. So you lay the cardboard on the bottom, and you want to build that giant pile. And then the idea is like, again, you kill the sod, you attract these beneficial insects. And if you get up like a 3-foot pile, that's going to break down to about a foot. You still have to add topsoil in the spring and then mix it up, but that's going to really, prep your soil a little bit. So another question, is this webinar for absolute beginners or intermediate gardeners? So we mentioned a little bit about it. It's a mix. I'm going to tell you a lot of things to do. You don't have to do all this stuff. Like sheet mulching is definitely not something you need to do. It's just something that can help you if you have a little time to prep your soil. But it's kind of a mixture between beginners and intermediate. But we'll try to outline different things I'll try to mention different things you don't have to do if you're a beginner gardener. Then there's a thing called double digging. So this is a great way to start your garden right away. So the idea behind double digging is you're digging a 2-foot deep. You're tilling your area, your garden area, 2 foot deep. And really, it's like it's really hard to just like kind of take a shovel and just dig 2 feet. So what a lot of people are doing. So instead, you kind of dig 1 foot deep, and then you take like a pitchfork and you till the 2nd foot. So how this works is a little confusing. So people, you could YouTube this. It's all right. So it's a little confusing. You can YouTube videos on how to actually do this. But idea is, let's say you have like a garden that's like 4 feet wide and 8 feet long. So you want to take a foot section at first, and you dig out a foot out there, and then move the soil over. So you have a 1 foot deep hole, and then you take a pitchfork, and you kind of and then you break up the second foot. So that way you have a hole that's foot deep, and then you break up the second foot. And then you'll take another foot section, right next to it. You'll dig up that foot, put it on top of here, and then pitchfork that bottom right here. And then you keep on doing that on the next section. You move, over one. And then the idea, you keep on doing that till you get to the end, and then you move that, the material you have from the first, hole, you move that to the last hole. It's a little confusing. Every time I try to explain this, people are a little confused. Like I said, you could YouTube it, and they'll actually show you how to actually do it. But the general idea is you only do this for a new garden. This is just to prep the area. You wouldn't want to do this every year because it's a lot of work. It's going to kill your back. But you do that just to kind of prep your area and get it ready for a new garden. And the idea is you're going to have 2 feet of nice tilled soil. Like I said, you only need 1 foot for most plants, but your plants are super happy with 2 feet. And while you're doing that, it's a great time to add compost if you have some bags of compost and kind of mix it all up. There's another question. Can this information be used for community garden plots? Yeah. For sure. If you're starting on a new plot, like a lot of national parks gardens, they're in the ground. If you're doing raised beds, you can also do this with raised beds, but you really only need to till 1 feet deep, and then you add a foot on top of that. If you're doing a raised bed, just think, the whole idea is you want to have 2 feet of nice tilled soil, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the raised bed section. All right. So most of your soil structures, the ideal soil structure is 40% sand, 40% silt, and 20% clay. So sand are soil particles that are super big. So that means when they get combined together in soil, they have a lot of holes, a lot of porosity. They allow water to drain through really quickly, but they don't hold on to nutrients that well. And then clay are particles that are super small. So when they get pushed together in soil, they compact really quickly. There's not a lot of porosity and not a lot of air, but they can hold on to nutrients really well. And silt is kind of like the medium particle, kind of the in between. But in DC, what you're going to find is most soils in DC are clay based. We just have a lot of clay in DC. So there's a couple things you could do to kind of mix up a little bit. One thing, one thing that's great about compost is if you have clay-based soil or you have sandy-based soil, adding compost works with everything. So if you add compost to sandy soil, it'll actually help hold on to moisture and water and nutrients and things. But if you add compost to clay soil, it'll actually add some, porosity. It'll start building up some biology that will kind of help, break down different things. So it's great, adding compost to either soil is great. That's like the first thing you want to do. But if you have really clay soil, you want to, if you want to add some more amendments, getting some kind of coarse sand or perlite. We'll talk about perlite in a second. To add, perlite is like those little, I always get that mixed up, perlite. But yeah, this is little white, they look like styrofoam balls. They're expanded, they're heated expanded shell. We'll talk more about that on the list. I always get this mixed up with another one, but we'll add those things. Actually, add some more porosity to your garden. So then amending soil. So every year we need to add compost to your garden because your garden is going to use up a lot of nitrogen, use up a lot of its nutrients. So it's going to help kind of add nutrients to your garden, adding compost. So, but there's 2 different ways to kind of add it: is till and non-till. So if you're adding compost, generally, people ask how much compost should I add every year. It's really hard to add too much. But the idea is you want to completely cover your whole garden with compost for maybe an inch or two, and then you want to till it in. So that's generally the good rule of thumb of how much compost you want to till. If you're doing till, that's when you take like a shovel or a hoe and you mix it all up into the soil. And that's great to really add. You want to do that every year because that's going to mix up your soil, because your soil gets compacted over time. People step on it. Every time it rains, it compacts a little bit. And this is going to air it up, fluff it up. It's going to allow more oxygen to get to your roots and things like that. So that's, really fantastic. It's going to mix up the soil evenly. But then a lot of people are starting to do what's called non-till. And non-till, you hear this a lot in the permaculture world. This is the idea of like kind of understanding our soil biology a little better. So we have a lot of beneficial biology in our soil, funguses and bacteria. And a lot of that, it's really great at breaking down nutrients. A lot of times you have certain nutrients in your soil that's just not plant accessible. Like, don't quote me on this, but if you have like, like a NO3, a plant can't pick that up, but then some biology comes in, some bacteria eats it up, breaks it down to NO2, and then all of a sudden your plant can, soak it up, so having more healthy biology really helps with like that, with your nutrients being readily. So a lot of people, they want to preserve that, because every time you really till and chop up all your soil, that it doesn't kill your biology, but it sets it back. It damages it a little bit. It'll rebound, especially if you're adding compost. It's not that a huge deal, but a lot of people want to kind of maintain that and build on that. So then they do what's called non-till. So instead of like getting a shovel and just mixing everything up, they'll lay the compost over the top of their garden, and then they'll get you can either use a pitchfork, a garden fork, or this is called a broad fork, which we have in the tool share when it opens back up. But you kind of step on that every couple inches, and you kind of, or with a pitchfork, you just kind of stab your soil, get that fork in there, and then wiggle that fork around a little bit. And then it's, go a couple more inches and stab it and wiggle it. And what it does, it's not going to, hurt all your biology by mixing it up, but it's going to just kind of open up your soil a little bit. And then the idea is you can get compost in there, and the compost can kind of fall down from there. Just one second. And then, okay, let me read some questions real quick. Okay, so Greta says, I want to start a garden without tilling. Which method for starting a bed works best? So we talked about non-till. We'll talk a lot more about non-till too, such as like when you pull plants out, you want to, cut them at the base and leave their roots in there to kind of like, to add more organic matter. And getting perennial plants in there to like, build. We'll talk a lot about non-till throughout this section, but yeah, that's the best thing is just like using till. So not super smart to use. Yeah, the pitcher, not super smart to use a broad fork and flip flops either, for sure. Yeah, not super smart to use flip flops in general. That person's definitely going to hurt their feet. What about liquid compost like seaweed based fish? Yeah, so we're about to talk about amendments. So right now we're just talking about like the compost, like the organic amendments, but then there's some fertilizers we'll talk about in a second. So when it comes to fertilizers, there's two choices: inorganic and organic fertilizer. Inorganic is like, your chemicals, it usually comes in these bright, colored pebbles. And then they usually have like I was talking about, the NPK. It will tell you like how much it, like how high, it is with nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus and things like that. The problem with inorganic is that a lot of times it's too much nitrogen, like a lot of miracle grows and things like that. So a lot of times it's too much nitrogen. Because nitrogen is really good at growing leafy greens, like the green parts of your plants. Sorry about that. So the inorganic, the fertilizers, So it grows too quickly, the green mass, and it overcomes the root systems, and then it doesn't develop very good fruits because it's growing too much leafy green stuff parts, and then it just starts getting unhealthy. It's not balanced. The root systems can't manage like the health, and so you start having kind of weaker plants, and that's really, we'll talk more about this with pest and disease class, but that's really where the pest and diseases will start coming into. They always attack the weaker plants first. So, and at the same time, it's really bad for the environment because a lot of this stuff, it washes off really easily into our water systems, and then we have high fertilizers in our anacostia, and we have blooms and all kinds of stuff. So we want to try to get away from inorganic, and we want to use organic. Organic's great because it's slow releasing. Like compost isn't going to wash away when it rains, and there's no runoffs and things like that. So that's really what we want to go through. And so there's a lot of options with this though. The best one is just compost. You want to get compost, into the add compost every year to the garden. That compost, we'll talk more about this in our compost class, but I mean it does everything from adding organic matter, adding nutrients, has most of the, if not all the nutrients you want, holds moisture, builds soil structures, even helps with like pH levels. If you're a little bit off, it has this pH buffers zone that will help with like if you're trying to grow blueberries and things like that. So compost is something, try to get compost into your garden every year. You can add it throughout the year. We'll talk about top dressing in a second. But the second one, compost teas. So we'll talk about compost teas during compost class, but this is really fantastic. It's like you're creating a probiotic spray. It's like you get some finished compost, you put it in like pantyhose or cheesecloth, you put it into a bucket of water, get like a $10 aquarium pump and let it bubble, add some organic molasses, and do that, and you let it bubble for like a day or two, and then you have this really amazing probiotic spray that you can spray on your plants, you can spray in your soil, and it's really going to like add a lot of healthy biology to your soil. And then on top of that, there's a lot of things like compost and manure. You want to be careful with manure. You always want to be organic because there's a lot of herbicides that's used in horse feeds and cow feeds that will survive. They're persistent. They'll survive the stomachs of the animals and they'll poop out. And then you're putting, pesticides into your garden. So how you do that is you get your organic your manure from National Park Service stables. There's two of them in DC, one at Rock Creek and one at DuPont. And you could go there and pick up your manure. I would call first. I'm not sure about their operating status, but a lot of times they just have a giant pile. You just pull your car up, fill up some buckets. You want to make sure though it's aged. If it's still steaming, you want to let it just kind of sit for a while and break down. Ultimately, like you want aged manure is manure that's been sitting in a pile for a year. That way, because if you add fresh manure, it's going to it's called burning your plants. It's going to it's going to it's going to make it hard for your plants to suck up water, and it kind of burns them. So you want to make sure that manure, it's been sitting in the pile for a year, or if not, you just want to let it sit in a pile for a year and let it kind of age or you can add it to your compost bin, and that will increase it so you don't have to wait a year. So fish, so another thing is fish fertilizers and seaweed mixes. So fish fertilizers are really great for NPKs. They're really low. If you look at, so this is my all-time favorite fertilizer. If you don't want to get into fertilizers, if this is like too much for you, just get this fertilizer. It's called it's Organic Neptunes. It's fish and seaweed mix. So this fish gives it like the NPK, and then the seaweed kelp meal, these are like has all the micronutrients, and it's low. If you look at like 231, that's a very low nitrogen, which is good. You want low nitrogen. As a organic, inorganic is like 21.3. I mean, this is more Miracle-Gro. That's way too much. So you're looking for things that are like low number fertilizers, just so you don't over fertilize. So this is a fantastic fertilizer. It's got all the micro and macronutrients. What I do, you can order it from a big bucket. It's a little smelly, but what you do is you just add like a small, like a tablespoon or half a cup into a watering can. Then you fill that watering can with water, mix it up a little bit, and then just water your garden. And that's really fantastic. We'll talk about seedlings too. I mean, we use that for seedlings. That's really, but the really thing about fertilizing is you don't want to do this too much because it starts accumulating salts if you over fertilize. So I would never really, I mean, I would maybe at the most fertilize once a month, but I typically only fertilize once a season. Like I'll fertilize once in spring, once in summer, and maybe once in fall. And that's all you really need. I mean, you want, like I said, you don't want to over fertilize because that's going to accumulate salts after a while, and it's going to cause some damage. And then the vermiculite is that expanded shell. I was talking about the perlite. So if you want to add some soil structure, you could add these things, especially if you're doing raised beds. The perlite is like when you look at, you buy your plants and it looks like these little styrofoam balls. So that's actually like, I think it's like lava rock that's been, heated up and expanded. And then, if you have pH, the problem with adjusting your pH is it takes a while. It takes years to really adjust your pH. If you're just a little bit off, you can add things like sulfur, coffee grounds, pine needles. If you're a little bit, too alkaline, if you're a little too acidic, you can add eggshells. Eggshells are great, anyways. To add eggshells, crumple them up, and they slowly leach out potassium and calcium and things like that. But really, like the pH, that's only if you're a little bit off on pH. If you're really off, it takes so many years to actually fix. Okay, so everyone say bye to my daughter. She's leaving now. Okay, thank you everyone for your patience. All right, so a couple questions here. What's the difference between fertilizer and compost? Great question. So compost, I mean, it's more of that. We'll talk more about composting, but during the compost class. But it's more of this bulky, it's soil amendment that you're adding structure to your fertilizer. A lot of these other things are just liquids that you're adding to. And compost is a lot more long lasting. Like you add compost once a year, and it's going to last. Slowly release nutrients over the year. A lot of these fertilizers, within a month or so, they're gonna wash away. So compost is more. You definitely want to do compost. You don't have to do fertilizers if you don't want to. But definitely add compost every year to your garden. Oh, there's one. Can you clarify which is the fertilizer you recommend? It's not clear from the slide. So it's the fertilizer I recommend is called Organic Neptune's Harvest. Somewhere write it on the. It's got a funny looking Greek god guy that it's called Neptune Harvest. So I just sent that to privately. Sorry. So I'm sending it out to everyone in the Neptune's Harvest. Okay, so I definitely recommend if you want to get into fertilizers, it will help a little bit, especially if you do it once a season. It'll give it a boost. Yeah, I would just strongly urge not to go too crazy on fertilizers. Compost, you can go crazy as you want, but fertilizers, be as it's like be conservative. Okay, someone actually posted the Amazon Neptune's Harvest. If you guys want, check it out. Okay, so moving on. So top dressing. So this is another thing you could do throughout the year. You could actually just say, okay. So let's say you get some compost throughout the year. You've already tilled things. Your plants are growing really great. You don't want to retill everything and mess up you kill your plants. So you can top dress. If you have some extra compost, it's basically just kind of lay out an inch of compost around your plants. Ideally, you don't want to do this a month before you harvest some greens, because in case the compost, especially if it's home compost and it has some bad bacteria. We're going to talk about that in compost class, but sometimes if you don't do the compost right, you can get some anaerobic bad bacteria. A lot of that stuff will break down anyways in your soil, but needs a little time to break down. So you just don't want to, like, if you're about to harvest a bunch of greens, you don't want to throw top dress. But for plants that are going to take another month or two, you can top dress it. Just lay a bunch of compost on the top, and then as it rains, it's all going to kind of slowly mix in with your and leach out its nutrients. And then cover crop. Cover crop is a fantastic. I mean, this is like the best thing you could do for your garden. But I would not recommend cover cropping for beginner gardeners, because this could be it takes some planning, but it's a great way to add, enormous amount of nutrients. I always talk about, I don't know if people remember, they're now called the Owl Nest Farm up in Upper Marlboro, but they used to be called the Radix Farm. We used to do classes up there, and then they would talk about, they're in Upper Marlboro, they're in this protected area where they're not even allowed to add compost because the watershed, which is completely backwards, like, because compost actually prevents water runoff, but there's someone, yeah, whatever. You can't add compost in this area because people are worried about these leaching and runoffs into the watershed. They had like 100-person CSA with no compost or fertilizers, but they were able to maintain their fertility just by doing cover crop, because it adds so much nutrients to cover crops. And so cover crops, if you can add them in the summer, most people, winter cover crop, they'll plant their cover crop around like September, October. You get it going, and then it protects your garden over the winter. And then it looks like this like grass. It looks like you just plant a bunch of like winter grass, winter wheats, winter rye. And then in the spring, they'll chop it all down, and they'll till it up, and let it decompose, and it'll just add so much beneficial nutrients to your garden. There's also warm weather, like if you're going to go away in like June and you don't have time to plant your garden. The main thing is you don't want to leave soil exposed. So that means like you could eat. I mean, if you have some exposed soil, you can just buy some mulch and throw it on top. Cover it up, or you can plant what's called buckwheat. This stuff grows super quickly. It'll attract all kinds of beneficial insects, and it will keep out weeds and things like that. And then when you're ready to plant, like a week before, you just till it all up, let it kind of decompose a little bit in your soil, and then plant. And it's really great for your soil. You can also do like legumes. A lot of people will plant white clover and over the winter. White clover is the short clover. It's only a couple inches tall, and then crimson clover and red clover is like kind of the taller ones. A lot of people use white clover, and that will, again, a nitrogen fixer that will start adding nitrogen to your soil. If you have really bad soil, you want to break up your soil a little bit. There's these things called daikon radishes. And they've hybrided some of them called tillage radishes. But a daikon radish is like, it'd be like it's like a foot long, and it'll just it's a huge radish that will just burrow into your soil, and you can harvest them if you want, or you can leave them in your soil, and they'll break up your soil. Then as they decompose, they'll add lots of nutrients to your soil. So that's a great way if you got really like clay area and you want to plant things in the fall, to kind of break up and condition your soil. And we'll talk more about that in the calendar class. We'll talk about when exactly to do cover crops. Yeah, essentially, like if you do it, like you like I said, you seed it out, cover crop, which is basically really small seeds. You just kind of scuff up the top surface of your soil, broadcast, spread out the seeds, cover them with a light layer of soil, water them, maybe some straw or mulch, and then once they start going, they're fine. You don't need to water them usually, or water them less. And then they grow out. Idea is they grow out in the winter. They'll protect your garden, and then in the spring, usually about a month before you start, you want to start planting. You cut back the cover crop. Just kind of lay it on the top, let it kind of decompose a little bit. Then mix it and till it in the soil. Water it really well, and just give it like a week or two to really kind of decompose into your garden. And then you plant your plants in there, and that's like I said, this is not beginner stuff. This takes a little bit of planning, and it's a little bit tricky, but when you're ready, it's fantastic nutrients for your soil. But we'll be talking about cover crop a lot more throughout the different classes and stuff. Oh, all right. So now about garden beds. I'm looking at time. We might go a little bit over one. Because I'm recording this, I'm going to keep on going until the class is finished. But y'all are, just to know, it's about half an hour left of the class. We might not get to the end by 1, but I'll keep on going. Y'all are welcome to jump off whenever you need to, and I'll record the rest. All right, so garden beds. So now, we have, our spot. It has a lot of sunlight. It has, good drainage. It has, water access, and we prep the soil. We're getting it ready. Now we want to think about how are we going to build the garden beds? So just when we say garden beds, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're building a bed out of wood. That just means we're building an actual garden, a raised amount of soil. And so if you're growing in the garden, you don't need to actually build raised beds. You could build, your beds just by getting, this is called a hard rake. You definitely want a hard rake if you're growing it in the ground, and you just use that to kind of mound up. You rake up the sides and mound up your garden bed. Again, you want to have about a foot tall garden bed as all possible. And then that's what you're planting in there, and then you leave like a foot in between to be your pathway. And I would recommend getting some cardboard, laying that down, maybe some wood chips on top of the cardboard, just so you don't have weeds all over your paths. And ideally, you want to do that when you're doing this. You want to do this level. You don't want to have a garden bed that's like on a slant, because then everything's just going to wash down the hill. So a couple of ways, you're looking for the contour lines. So the contour lines are basically the lines where everything's generally the same elevation. And then, so easy way to do that is get some string, tie the strings to different posts, and get this is only a couple $, but it's like a string level, and you put that on the string, and then it'll tell you how, your slope and how level you are. It doesn't have to be perfectly level, but you want to get as level as possible. So that means you may need to orienteer, your garden in different ways. I mean, if there's a slope heading south, maybe you want to have your garden east to west beds, so that way you're finding the contour lines on the slope, so you want to do a little bit of planning and try to get this, and if it's really bad slope, that's when people, that's where people will start building terrace gardens, where they actually, build these like leveled areas down the slope, and maybe they get some wood or retaining walls to kind of, there's a lot of different ways you could do that. And then what I would recommend, if you're having garden beds, having paths, so you want to have, maybe your garden bed's like 3 feet wide, and then you want to have 1 foot wide walkways. But that's good for if you have no mobility issues. But if you have some mobility issues, you want to think about maybe 3 foot wide paths. And then if you have wheelchair access, the ADA requirements is you need to have at some point these 5 feet wide turnarounds. So if you're in a wheelchair, you need at least 5 feet in order to turn around that wheelchair. And how we do that with a lot of our gardens is we'll have 3 feet wide paths inside the garden, so people with wheelchairs they can go anywhere inside the garden. And then on the outside of the we'll have a 5 foot path all the way around the bed, so they can go down a path, and if they need to turn around, they go to the outside and kind of turn around to come back. So that's one way to do it. If you're designing ADA, there's a lot of information that you could Google on how to do that. Okay, so there's a couple questions. So it looks like, Ace Hardware definitely has that Neptune harvest if you're looking for a local place. Okay, so when you say remove until the buckwheat a week or so before you plant crop, is that like chopping it and drop? Yeah, sorry, I didn't see that on the, so that's you want to pull it all up and just chop it up in as little pieces as possible, and then mix it all into the garden, and then water the garden really well, and the biology will start breaking all that stuff down, and it will create really amazing soil. All right, so now we're go on to raised beds. So let's say I love in-ground gardens. You can grow a lot of food, and it's a lot cheaper because you don't have to build structures, but there's just something super easy about raised beds for a lot of reasons, especially in DC. We'll get we'll have really bad rain, rain sometimes. And I'll see that, after it rains, solid, a couple of inches in a week, I'll go to these gardens that are all in ground, and they're just flooded, and then I'll see raised beds, and they're happier than ever, because they have that drainage. So it's super easy. It's accessible. You don't have to break your back. We'll talk about different ways to build beds so you can actually sit on the sides and stuff. And it just has great drainage. You can control the soil. You can order your own soil. Probably the two drawbacks is a little bit more expensive. We'll talk about pricing in a second. And it's just it's not as efficient as you're growing in the ground. But really, you need. But if you're on, a lot of these national park gardens, like at Fort, DuPont, gardens, Peabody gardens. They're 20 foot by 20 foot garden plots. And if you're a first-time gardener, that is going to be too much. That's going to destroy you. Trust me, like the weeding and everything. I mean, you really need to know what you're doing to get to set that garden up so it's going to be low maintenance. So I definitely recommend raised beds if you're a beginner gardener. All right, so building raised beds. So a couple different recommendations. Typically, what you're looking for, most raised beds are 4 feet wide and 8 feet long. Just 4 feet wide because you can't. If there's anything wider, you can't reach it. You can't if you have like an 8 foot by 8 foot bed, there's going to be a section in the middle of the bed that you can't reach without actually stepping into the garden, the raised bed, which is you don't want to do because that's going to compact your soil. So I wouldn't do anything wider than 4 feet. And then 8 feet long is a general rule of thumb because if you're using like 2-inch boards, anything longer, it's going to start bowing and it's just not going to be stable unless you have some cross sections. I mean, I've done raised beds that are like 20 feet long, 4 feet wide, but we've had different cross sections or we use like concrete blocks and stuff, things that aren't going to bow. But typically, I would stick with a 4 foot by 8 foot bed. You want it to be at least a foot tall. And then this is what I was talking about with double digging. If you're doing raised beds, you do it at least foot tall and then get in the middle, before you add the soil, you till up that garden soil in the middle and then add your soil. And that's going to be your 2 feet double dig. And that's really your plants are really going to be happy with that. Unless your soils, like I said, if there's like toxic stuff, then you would want to get some kind of landscape fabric to keep it from there. But for the most part, yeah, that's what I would do. I would recommend not doing, I see a lot of garden beds that are made out of 1-inch thick boards. I would not recommend those because those things after about a year or two just like decompose. If you're going to do the least thickness I would do is 2 inches. So that means if you're doing a 2 by 12, that means it's 12 inches tall and 2 inches thick. And that will buy you about 5 years before you have to replace it. And we'll talk about other dimensions too that will buy, like 4x4s and 6x6s that will buy, give you a lot more longevity. But then that's longevity. But then that's it just gets more expensive. So it's really about how much do you want to spend. And like a first good garden, like if this is your first time garden, I would recommend 2x12s are pretty inefficient or pretty cheap. I mean. But if you're doing 2x12s, you want to get like a tree stake or get a 2x4 and cut it into little pieces and put it in the corners. And then, because that's going to really add a lot of stability. If you're just going to, notch it or just like attach them, with screws, it's going to eventually fall apart. But if you have these like corner stakes, and you drill in the corner stakes, that's really going to add a lot of durability to your garden. And to kind of, okay. And there's a lot of different options. Untreated pine is the basic one that a lot of people do. So treat it, so there's a lot of wood that's treated. It's when you see that wood, it's got that green tint to it. It basically, they inject under pressure a fungicide into your wood to keep it to last a lot longer. They used to use arsenic way back in the day. Like they stopped doing that in the 70s. But you want to be careful if you're picking up, like old wood that it's not like, arsenic wood. But now they use, it's called micronized copper azul. It's a micronized copper, which is a fungicide. It's EPA approved, but it's also a copper. It's not something that you want to like touch and then lick your fingers, So it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's also you just want to be a little careful with the copper. Some people just don't want to deal with it because this is a fungicide. It's going to leach out and it's going to kill some of your biology. It's not going to wipe out all your biology, but it's going to set a little bit of back. So what we do with, but it's just so cheap and it lasts a long time. So we build a lot of treated wood, but we'll put some kind of barrier in between it. You could do landscape fabric, or you could do like a food grade poly plastic. Like they make these really great like aquaponic stores will sell like food grade plastics, and you just tape it, so the soil's not touching the wood. So that way the copper doesn't just leach into the soil. But I don't think it's a huge deal. A lot of people don't mind it. They don't think so either. So they'll build pressure treated wood beds and just keep your soil into it. It's really your preference. And I would recommend, if you have the money, I would definitely recommend building beds out 4x4s or 6x6s. These are going to last, decades. And you can, what's nice if you do them like 2 or 3 tall, like we try to build our beds out 6x6s, and we do 3 of them on top of each other. It's like a nice little perch where you can actually sit, especially if you have like mobility issues, if it's hard to constantly bend over. That's a really fantastic way to kind of just sit on the side and garden. Um, and then if you have lots of money, cedar. Cedar may be about 3 or 4 times expensive, but cedar has its natural fungicide, so it's going to last just as long as pressure treated wood, but you don't have to worry about the copper leaching out. And we're going to talk more about this in the carpentry class, but if you do 4x4s and 6x6s, I would recommend getting timber locks. They're these long screws. They're really easy and fun to put in, but it's a great way to attach them. So a couple questions. Any issues with painting the raised bed? I imagine it's just a time of cost. Yeah, I would just only paint the outside. I wouldn't paint the inside because that paint's just going to kind of, and the soil is just going to break it down really well. We'll talk about like using like linseed oil and things like that. It can buy you maybe another year or so, but it's not. Yeah, it's not a huge deal. But we'll talk more about that in a slide coming up soon. All right, so let's talk about some numbers. So there's a lot of numbers up here, but this is basically if you're trying to build a raised bed, the price, what really kills you is the soil. The soil is kind of pricey, but the price is going to range anywhere between like $100, $150 for a basic bed that's going to last a couple years I mean, you can go up to like $1,000 if you wanted a bed that's going to last, 50 years and things like that. So these are general estimates. It's always good with wood, especially wood. The price fluctuates so much. So and these are based on Home Depot prices, but you can, I would definitely double check these before you order. But this gives you kind of a sense of like, if you're building like a 4-foot by 8-foot bed, that's 1 foot tall or 12 inches tall. So these little asterisk things, 2 of them means an inch and 1 of them means a foot. So you're doing a basic 4x8 bed. You can see just like the wood alone, like kiln drying is going to be about $40, pressure treated about $50, cedar about $160, and then some hardware to kind of keep it together. If you want to do 4x4s and then selling like it's going to be $90 of wood, it's going to increase that. And then 4x4s and 6x6s of cedar is super expensive. You usually have to special order it. And then like kiln drying 6x6s are hard to find, but pressure treated you could usually find really easy. So you can see some of these pricings. It'll give you kind of an estimate of what you need. And then the hardware, like screws and things, like could be in there $10 to $30. But the soil is what kills you. So for one raised bed that's 8 foot by 4 foot, you're going to talk about a little bit over a cubic yard of soil, which isn't bad if you can order it. But like buy it by bulk. And if you have a couple neighbors that want to throw in with you, it's not so bad because the delivery fees when you order soil from like a garden center could be like, around $100 delivery fee, but then it's like $30 cubic yards. But it's not bad if you're splitting it with people, but it could be expensive by your own. But if you're just going down to a garden store and buying bagged soil, to get a cubic yard, most bags, they're different. They could be 0.75 cubic feet, 1 cubic feet, they're different areas, but most bags, it takes about 40 bags to fill up a garden bed. Depending on what the cubic feet is, you need 32 cubic feet. So, that's something to think about. Like, are you going to, do you have a truck to transport that? Garden centers like Ace Hardware, they'll deliver it, but that's like another, maybe $30, $40 fee. So a lot of this takes a little shopping around. But I put these numbers up just to give you kind of an estimate, but then you need to call these actual places just to see what their current prices are. But I would recommend completely filling your bed full of soil and then buying a couple bags of compost to throw on top. Because like I said, we used to do 50-50, like 50% compost, 50% soil, but then, which is great, but then after in the end of the year, all that compost breaks down and your bed's only half full, and that means crap. Next I have to, keep on doing this. I have to buy a whole bunch of compost every year, as opposed to just filling it completely up with topsoil and just adding a couple bags of compost every year. I really recommend that. But yeah, this is kind of, and this is cedar, pressure treated, it's got that green tint, and then like the normal kiln dried wood. So again, yeah, this just takes, it takes a little while just to kind of play with this, these numbers. But I just want to throw up some estimates just to get you started. And then if you want to get away from wood, you don't have to do wood. There's a lot of other options. You can buy this like very expensive plastic recycled lumber that's like, it's like 50% recycled wood mixed with different kinds of polys. That will last like 50 years. You could buy these nice kits with corner pieces. Yeah, I mean, we've tried some of them out. And they're all right. But and then metal, you could buy metal. I would recommend, we'll talk more about this in the hardware class or the carpentry class, but when you're doing outside metals, you want to look for galvanized steel. So that's kind of like that steel that's not shiny. It's more like kind of like, hazy steel. And there's always questions about, does it leach things? Everything I've ever read, it doesn't really leach any amount of things. I mean, it's more if you spill acid on it, or some kind of orange juice or something, that it might leach some things out. But in normal soil conditions, you shouldn't have to worry about that. And then just getting, if you live on some woods, just cutting up some logs, I've done this before. It's great. It will only last a couple years, like a year or two, but it's free. And then concrete blocks. Really like concrete block gardens a lot, but don't use cinder blocks. Cinder blocks are the lighter concrete blocks that they mix the concrete with fly ash. It's a heavy metal from like coal company factories and things like that. Because it's really construction material, and you want to make it lighter. So you want to get the heavy concrete blocks. It's really cool. Like some people will fill them up with like soil, and they'll grow like garlic around the edges, or you could put like nice, tops on them, and have a nice place to like sit on the sides. I really would recommend that. We do a lot of concrete blocks, and they're pretty great. So if you want to actually look at some of them, we built this garden. This is my favorite garden that we built at DC Parks and Rec. We did this like 3 years ago, and we wanted to test out all different kinds of like materials just to see how they all hold up. So it's called Langdon Community Garden. It's in Langdon Park, all the way on the southeast corner. It's a big park. It's where like the on spacing, there's a really Chuck Brown Memorial. It's where that is. We have a rec center there, and the pool. This is the pool up here. It's south of the pool. But we did 6 different garden beds. We did the concrete ones with concrete tops, metals with a wood frame, recycled plastic. We did this fancy one where we got bottles and encased it. It's super expensive, and yeah. And then we did cedar beds, and then pressure treated beds with a poly barrier, with the goal of just kind of monitoring this and seeing how they go, and kind of and so if you want to go out there, it's fenced off, but you can look at all the beds and you can see how they work and get some ideas. And then critter prep. So we're gonna have a whole class talking about critter proofing and things you could do, but some really easy ones you could do if you don't attend that class. Hardware cloth. So it's important if you're gardening, you need to know the difference between chicken wire and hardware cloth. Chicken wire is like the big, it's only good for chickens. I've seen rats just like with a running start, just like run right through chicken wire. But hardware cloth is like a much smaller, it's a little bit more expensive, but they're either 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch holes. That will keep out like if you have gophers or moles or issues, you can put some on the bottom of your bed, then put the soil over. You can we'll have a whole class on how to make low tunnels for like bending pipes and stuff, and making like structures with hardware cloth if you got rodents and things, mammals that eat your plants, like squirrels and deer are the worst. But also just thinking about like, this is like the best thing for deer. If you have deer issues, it's called a motion sensor spray. It's got a little laser, and when something crosses it, it'll squirt it real quick. And it's real great effective with deer. You'll also squirt yourself and dogs and things like that, but it works really well. And then like moles and gophers, there's different sonic spy, I've heard mixed reviews about this stuff, but we'll have a whole class talking about mammals and critters and stuff. DC's got a lot of critter issues, so that's a big issue with all this stuff. And then we're experimenting with building big cages and stuff. We normally do this during our carpentry courses, but we'll talk more about this and do some online versions of this on the. But if you're growing tomatoes, and you want to protect them, like this is actually the brain food garden. Brain food is awesome. nonprofit that unfortunately just went under last year, but it was around for 20 years. Their garden is in the middle of Chinatown, so they have rats everywhere, and they would just eat everything. So we would build these like giant critter-proof cages that would have like doors that would open up and things. So we'll talk a lot more about that during the carpentry class on how to do that. And then, so I talked about like with preservatives, if you want to paint it or you want to add, some kind of a wood finish, make sure it's organic, like tung oil or linseed oil. Make sure it's 100% organic, not mixed with some kind of a. And you could do this. You could you just coat all your wood and then let it dry for a day and then fill it up. I've heard mixed reviews like that will buy you maybe in the next extra year or two. Because I did like technically you're supposed to recoat this stuff every year, but once the soil is inside, you're not going to be able to do that. So, I mean, if you have some laying around, great, but I wouldn't recommend buying this stuff. I don't think it's very worth it, but it's definitely something to think about. And then we talked, about slopes, the importance of gardening on contour lines, not gardening downhill so everything washes away. Here's some great examples of different, like, terrace gardens. But again, this also is true with raised beds. So if you're on a slope, you don't want to just build your raised bed, on that slope. You want to dig into that slope. And then install your raised bed and get some kind of level. You want to make sure your raised bed, I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, but, as close as level as possible. So that may mean that you got to dig into the slope or you got to raise up the other end. So things to think about. So we're gonna have a whole class on container gardening. So I'm gonna leave this slide here. I just kind of put it in there, and just in case you don't take container gardening, there's all these different information. So if you don't join us on the container garden class, but we have a whole 2 hours to talk about container garden classes, and there's a lot of fun things that we can do with containers. And then watering systems. Just a time check. So we have a couple minutes left for towards 1. I think I don't have a whole lot of slides left. Probably another 15, 20 minutes. I'm going to keep on going just for the recording, but feel free if you need to, if you have on time limit, to jump off. And then I'm sending recordings to everyone, so you'll still get the recording if you didn't complete it. But the watering system. So the idea with watering is you don't want to high pressure water things. You're going to wash away your soil. You're going to damage your plants. Ideally, you don't want to water your plants at all. You want to water your soil. It's sometimes hard to do, but so like we'll talk about different techniques to kind of work on that. But the idea is like, especially at night, if you're watering after work at like an hour or two before it, the sun goes down and you spray water all over your leafy greens, and then the sun goes down, you could attract some like mildews and things like that. So the idea is you want to preferably water in the morning. Or if you're watering at night, just be really careful to just water the soil. Sometimes you just got to do it. Like I said, a lot of this stuff are just recommendations. And like if I'm having a bad day, I just want to water really quickly, I'll just water everything, and just not even think about it. But these are if you have the time and patience, definitely try to water just the soil. Try to use, like, if you got wands that kind of slow the pressure, watering cans, these multi-pattern nozzles, use a spray, not the misting spray, but some kind of more like wanding spray is what you're looking for. Spray bottles and stuff. If you have we're going to talk about the seedlings, but when you're watering seedlings, you want to use watering cans or spray bottles. You don't want to, they're very delicate. Irrigation systems, we'll talk about that next slide, but drip irrigation and soaker hoses are great. And you can do these DIY, long-term watering. Like if I'm going to go away for a week, I can, like, you bury like a plastic bottle with some really small holes in it, fill that water up, and then we'll slowly leach water out to the garden. Terracotta, this is something that people have been doing for thousands of years. They bury terracotta. Terracotta is like the clay pots, and they're very porous. Even though they don't look like it, the water will slowly kind of like leach out of these pots. So they'll bury terracotta pots into the ground and fill them up with water, and then put a cap on top, and then that water will slowly leach out and water your plants over a couple days. So there's some DIY ones. Drip irrigation. So I'm not going to get too much into this. We used to have whole classes where we had this this awesome gardener, Kate Lee from DC Greens, that would, like, she had all these like kits that we would try things out. But the main thing about drip irrigation, so drip irrigation is fantastic if you're looking for a low maintenance garden. You basically you're setting up your a timer with that onto your water spigot, where you turn the water spigot on. You have hoses and everything kind of going out, different emitters, and so it's like self-watering. Like, it will, like, you set the timer. There's some suggested timers, like you set it, especially in the summer, like twice a day for like 30 minutes. It'll slowly leach out water, and it waters everything really great. It's not a perfect system. I still recommend going out there, like, once a day, or every other day, just making sure that everything is getting watered. It's not like set it up and forget about it, but it's a pretty straight low maintenance system. But there's a lot of pieces to it. Like, the idea is, like, here's your water valve, and then some places will have, you may need a backflow preventer, which keeps water from going back into the water supply. Pressure regulators, filters, timers, and then it goes out into these tubes. And you have different emitters and different and smaller tubes, and it's a lot of Legos, just like putting things together. It's actually pretty fun. But there's this checklist of possible parts you could need. But honestly, I would recommend, if you go to like places like Drip Depot, you can order kits. And that kit will have everything you need. So you don't have to figure out all these things. Just order a kit, have instructions on how to set it up. Ideas, you want to space them out, every couple of inches. Have, like, this is a line with probably different emitters. These emitters are these little plastic caps that will, you punch a hole with a pocket punch, and then you plug this thing in, and it will slowly drop, out. Idea is to slowly water, so it doesn't, because plants, they're very slow when they suck up water. So if you water really quickly, all that water could just like wash off, and they won't get that much. So it's a really great way to water. It just takes a lot of, like, not a beginner thing. It takes a little bit of patience, fixing everything up and just monitoring it throughout the year. But and then winterizing it, you want to bring in all your timers and take the batteries out, drain the lines over winter too. So, but mainly the slide. I mean, if you're into it, check out Drip Depot, get a starter kit. And these are some suggestions for timers and winterizing and things like that. So it's a great way to do it. But I don't know. I don't do it. I just find it easier for me to just water by hand. But I know a lot of people do it, and it takes a little while to get a hang of it, but they love it after now. A big thing too is you want to avoid overwatering. Because overwatering actually looks a lot like underwatering. There's some subtle differences, like when you underwater things, they wilt and it looks like they're falling over. And overwatering, you'll get, like, brown tips and it disfigured. Maybe there'll be some smells coming from the soil. But I mean, this is really, I think more people kill their plants, especially indoor house plants, by overwatering than underwatering. The idea is you want to because plants need oxygen. The roots of the plants need oxygen, even though the tops are sucking in carbon. The roots are sucking up oxygen, and if it's too wet, it pushes all the oxygen out, and then your roots will start to rot, and then plants are going to look bad. But the thing is you want to think about your soil as like lungs. Like you water that. You water it. All the water pushes the oxygen out, and then you want to give it time to actually get sucked up, so some oxygen comes back in, and then you water it again. Basically the thing is like, if you're not sure, do a finger check. Put your finger in the soil, like 2 inches. If it's pretty moist in there, you may want to wait a day and come back and water the next time. And not to say that if you water a little bit too much for a couple of days, your plants are going to be fine. But this is more of like, if I'm overwatering every day for a while, my plants are going to die. So you want to really, be cautious and just kind of get used to your garden and how quickly the water gets sucked up. And the idea is you want to kind of water it as it's like, getting close to dry, and then rewater it again. But I mean, when in doubt, just check the moist, soil. It's all right if it's a little moist, water it. But if you put your finger in it and it's really wet, you may want to just wait a little while before watering. All right, and some hazardous. So some things that we're going to talk more about, like garden safe equipment, but just some things to think about, like when you're shopping for hoses. A lot of the hoses, um, you want to make sure your hoses don't have PVC. We'll talk more about all the different types of plastics, and there's like 4 plastics you want to use in your garden, 3 ones you don't. PVC is one of them. It'll leach out some things. Only with the sunlight hits it. And then brass couplings have like lead in it, so you want to have like nickel plated couplings. You want to look for hoses that are polyurethane. This is like the best hose. I don't know, I can't find them anymore. I hope they're not out of business. But Gator Hide is recycled polyurethane with nickel plated couplings. Couplings are like the ends where you hook up the hoses. Um, but just do a little research, when you're buying, materials. Like we talked about the first flush system, if you're doing rain gardens and things like that. And then garden signs. So this is the last section. It shouldn't take more than like 10 minutes, just to give you a heads up. But so garden design. So the garden design, the orientation is a big one to think about. Like how are you going to orientate your garden? How are you going to plant it? And the big thing about orientation is you want to think about stadium seating. So like the sun is like the football game that everyone wants to see. So you want to set it up so you have stadium seating. So in the south, you want to have your small plants. And in the middle, your medium-sized plants. And then on the back, you want to have your tall plants with trellises that are going to block lots of sunlight. And that way, your plants are going to get equal amount of sunlight for all plants. But you can actually play with that a little bit. Next class, we're going to talk about plants that you can plant in the cool weather, like a lot of greens. You're only supposed to plant in the spring, and then the summer is when like your warm weather plants, like your tomatoes and peppers and things like that. But you can get by with the greens because it's like like if you're planting collards and lettuces and spinaches and things. They can survive in the summer, but a lot of times they'll get bitter or they'll flower. Chard is one that does well in the summer, but most greens, they just get bitter. They don't taste as good because it's too hot out. So one thing you could do is you can completely flip this and have your tomatoes in the front and then plant all your greens in the back. And that's your tomatoes are going to give it partial shade, so it's going to cool them down a little bit. You'll need to water them a little bit extra, but that's one way where you can keep on growing greens all year long just by kind of flipping that around a little bit. And we'll talk more about that next class too. Then think about windbreaks too. So windbreaks, especially in the winter, if you're growing winter gardens or fall gardens, we have in DC, we have really harsh winds that come from the north and the northeast. So if you can, if you're built, if you have choice, try to build your garden on the south end of a house or a wall. That way that's going to block that, But then throughout your garden, try to build something like you want some circulation because that's going to help with like mold issues and fungal issues. Doing these wicker fences are great. A lot of times people just they'll plant perennial plants around their garden. This is what I do. I'll plant, berry bushes and raspberries and things that are perennial that are going to come back every year and get bigger. And I'll plant those all around my garden and then have my annuals in the middle. That way the perennials, they'll break up some of the air, the harsh winds, but you're still getting some through and you're getting circulation. So think about different ways that you can kind of like I said, you don't want to completely block the wind, but you want to kind of break it up a little bit. And the last section, last thing we'll talk about is row gardening versus square foot gardening. So these are two different types of gardens to design your garden. Like, do I want to have them in rows or do I want to do what's called square foot gardening, which we'll talk about in a second. So if you're doing planting by rows, so you want to do pretty clear, straight rows. I know, every time I'm like, I can just eyeball it, and it always looks awful. If you're doing rows, get some string, tie that to a stick on one end to the other, and then plant along that string. And then you can space it out. You can measure the rows. We'll talk more about spacing next class. Label them with like popsicle sticks. You can have these plastic labels that are if you write on Sharpie, just take a razor blade, you can actually scrape them off and rewrite, so you can reuse these plastic ones. And then you could even, like I said, like that level, get the string level if you want to, double check that your rows are level, and try to orientate it, so it's like, if you're got a slope that's going downhill on the south, maybe you want to have your rows going north or going east to west along the contour line. So that's if you're doing rows, and then if you stagger your rows, you'll have a lot more. Because the big goal is you want to not have a lot of empty space like this. I mean, you can mulch this, you know, but more exposed soil, the elements are going to, you know, slowly erode your soil. You're going to lose some biology. So the idea is you want to kind of plant all the space up, or get some kind of mulch to cover any kind of spaces that are not planted. But if you do like regular rows, very symmetrical, it doesn't, you know, you'll have lots of open spaces. So try to stagger the rows. So we got a question. Sorry, last question. We have a few vegetables sprouting in a seeding tray. Is it too early to plant outdoors this weekend? That's a good question. I'm going to load up our propagation class PowerPoint in our slides, so you can kind of see. It really depends on the temperature, the soil temperatures, but and what you're growing. If you're growing cool weather stuff like greens and collards and kale and cabbages and root crops, for sure you can start planting outside for now. But if you got things like if you got warm weather stuff like tomatoes and peppers, I would not, you know, I would wait till mid-May, because if it gets, you know, if you get a frost, it's going to kill those plants. So we're going to talk more about that cool weather versus warm weather next session. But if you want to email me, if you're ready to start right now, you can email me and I'll share that slide about what is cool weather and what is warm weather. Or maybe I'll pull that up towards the end. Let me finish this PowerPoint and then I'll pull up that slide real quick. And then, so the last part, we're going to talk about square foot gardening. So this is the idea where, like, instead of trying to like do rows and doing a lot of, you have to do a lot of thinning and things. This guy created this book, Melo Bartholomew, where he broke down gardens where you create these like foot by foot boxes, these squares, and then he has different things, you know, based on, like, you know, if you're doing beans, you could fit 9 beans in a square foot. If you're doing pepper, you could fit pepper in a square foot, and things like that. So in broccoli, you know, so he breaks it down. He actually has a chart. These are all estimates, though. You got to kind of you'll have to finagle it a little bit. And then I would definitely recommend trellising and pruning things. But if you want to do like 1 square foot, you can plant, you know, a broccoli, a cabbage, you know, a corn. 4 square feet, you could do, you know, 4 per square feet, you could do arugula, and then it kind of goes up to like different ones. And then there's got these big plants like artichokes will need 4 squares. Artichokes are huge, you know, pumpkins are huge, so you'll need actually, you know, 4 1-foot square foot. So something to think about. If you're more into it, like check out this book. There's a lot of resources online. It's a good starter. I did this when I was first starting to garden. It really helped me understand spacing, but I don't do it anymore because it's a little restrictive after a while. So that's why you measure out the square foot things by, you know, having strings or wood panels or things like that. All right, and that's the further reading. So this is a book reading. If you want to, you know, read some books, these are all really great books on different topics that we talked about. That's the end of this PowerPoint. I want to bring up my PowerPoint real quickly on the. Let me see if I can find it. Just on the cool weather versus warm weather to answer that question, because we're going to talk about this. Let's see. Just for people that want to start planting. So this is the next PowerPoint. Or no, it's not taking that. Just 1 second. I mean, oh, why is it still going back to it? Give me 1 second. Hmm. Oh man, it's so Let me close real quick. I'm gonna close this down. And just because it. Okay, so I think this is the only PowerPoint now. So hopefully this will work. Oh, okay. All right. So this is the next week's PowerPoint. We'll dive more into this, but so this is the list. If you want to screenshot this, this is a list of summer crops versus cool weather crops. So right now, you could plant all these things right now, these cool weather crops, because they can tolerate frost. But if you plant any of these things right now and there's a frost comes, they're going to die. So that's why we want to wait till about mid-May. People say after Mother's Day to start planting these things just to be safe. These things, they can tolerate a little bit heat. Like if you get a little shade, water it a little bit extra, you know, they can tolerate some heat. But these guys can't tolerate cool frost. So if you have any of these things, you can start planting them right now. So we'll go ahead. This is a good place to stop. I don't know if anyone has any questions left, or I'll read some questions. So last question, can a skylight provide sufficient sunlight for indoor plants? How can I determine if it provides enough? Well, we talked about like if you want to just time it when the sunlight comes. If you want to, you know, get a timer, click on it, check on it once an hour, and then as soon as you don't have sunlight, you can measure that, and that will tell you. That one of the first slides we talked about, for full sun stuff, you need 6 to 8 hours, or partial shade, you need 3 to 6 hours. So you could definitely try it out with that way. Now is a great time now that we're all stuck in or most of us are stuck in our houses. If you're stuck, that's a good way to try it out. Also, you can also like find ways to reflect that sunlight using mylar and aluminum foil, and that can help you, increase your amount of sunlight if you're not getting much sun. All right, another question: where can we access the PowerPoint? So the PowerPoint is on the Google Docs. So I try to load the Google Docs. I'll put I sent this out to everyone, but I'll type it down the URL. So if you click on that, that's where all the Google the PowerPoints are going to be loaded up as PDFs. We don't mind sharing it. Just not, no one, create some book, based on our PowerPoints and sell it or anything like that. That's, but yeah, please share it. Let's try to get everyone growing as possible right now. So check that out. And then and let me know if you have any issues. Just email me and I can send that directly to you. All right, if anyone else has any questions, you can even take yourself off mute if you want to ask a question, but I'll stick around for another couple minutes and then we'll log off. But thank you all so much for trying this out with us. We'll get the recordings up somewhere, and then hopefully I'll see everybody every Tuesday and Thursday for the next 6 weeks. Thank you all. And if you have any issues or feedback, please let me know. I'm pretty new to this, so I'm trying to figure out different ways to improve this experience.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. It was pretty awesome. I'm pretty new to gardening. With the rain barrels, do you have any like information about connecting those to those automated drip systems, or is there a place to go to look for that?
I mean, with those, I really with rain barrel. I mean, because with all these like drip irrigation, like the automated, a lot of that, it's about regulating the pressure, because everyone's pressure comes out from the faucet too high, so that's to regulate it, so the filters don't get damaged and things like that. With rain barrels, I mean, you could probably just get a soaker hose. We didn't talk about soaker hoses, but soaker hoses are just hoses that they slowly, it's made from like a fabric material that slowly leaches out the water. Because your rain barrel, it's going to be so slow anyways. It's a good question. I mean, in the rain barrel, you do need some pressure. So if you get your rain barrel up on some cinder blocks, you want to get it as high as possible, so you do have some pressure. But that's a good question. I'm not really sure exactly. I mean, sure, you could probably Google and try to figure out tips on rain barrels, but I just don't know if there's going to be enough pressure for a lot of these systems. But yeah, definitely let me know if you find out anything or how it goes. Oh, someone's asking, what do we need to do to get the Zoom participate? in future classes. So hopefully, so if you guys got this, you're all good to participate in all our classes. I'll probably let some more people off because I don't. We only went about half of our limit, so I'll probably invite more people. But there's a invite, Google Calendar invite with all the links. There's an email. Just email me, and I'll send you all that contact info. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody so much. Take it easy. Like I said, send me any feedback, any questions, and I'll see everybody every Tuesday and Thursday. Also, Wednesdays, noon to 1. I'll send out that link again. We're having a Q&A. So if you have any future, this is more for people that aren't participating, they're just getting the recording. But if you have specific questions, feel free to join us. You can just pop in for a couple minutes, ask a question, pop out. But yeah, I'll send that out in the future. Well, thank you, everybody.